a step in the right direction. And for that, I thank them and their organizations. It also coincides with the launch of Ibanity's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Statement. It's on our website now, and it talks about how Ibanity is pursuing multiple initiatives to increase diversity in our industry. So now I'd like to introduce Renee McFadden. She is Vice President and New York, New Jersey Sales Executive at Distinguished Programs. She holds a CIC and Target Markets Leader designation. But not only do I have the pleasure of doing business with her, but also we serve on the Ibanity board together, where she is in her second term as Executive Vice President and has served on the board for 6 years. You may also know her from her role as the chair of the Ibanity Awards Committee, which helped develop our education and refine the Emerging Leader Program, both programs designed to develop and create diversity and fresh faces in our industry. Renee is also a member of the New York chapter of the National African American Insurance Association, which we thank for helping us put on this event today. Without further ado, Renee McFadden.
Thanks, Justin. Welcome to the Insurance Brokers Association of New York's webinar on diversity and inclusion in the insurance industry. What's next? Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with two insightful and accomplished professionals in our industry. Denise Campbell, Assistant Vice President of National Accounts at AIG and President of the National African American Insurance Association's New York chapter. Denise is a leader at AIG's award-winning New York Black Professional Employee Resource Group. While serving as president, the Employee Resource Group won global awards in consecutive years for Best Strategic Business Programs. Welcome, Denise. We also have Ricky Jones, Regional President of Travelers for Underwriting in downstate New York and New Jersey, who has 35 years of property and casualty insurance experience and serves as the senior advisor to the company's military and veterans diversity network. He also serves on the National African American Insurance Association Board of Directors. Ricky is actively involved in Morris County's Habitat for Humanity, the New Jersey chapter of the National Black MBA Association, School 15 in Paterson, New Jersey, and Manna from Heaven. Welcome, Ricky. The goal of today's webinar is to inspire everyone to put their thinking caps on in order to actively solve for racial inequities concerning people of color. Given what's going on in our country, the current focus is on African Americans. Although slavery was abolished 155 years ago, the topic of race tends to be uncomfortable. However, we all know change happens outside of our comfort zones and through education. We're at a tipping point where we should focus on transforming our organizations to fit all people in lieu of changing people to fit an organization. Racial bias is ingrained in our society and inevitably ingrained in our workforces, which is a form of systemic racism. It's paramount that we develop a perpetual collective culture of laws, beliefs, behaviors, and habits. Although today's topic warrants a good deal of focus, we've carved out an hour to discuss our personal perspectives, race in America, the reasons diversity and inclusion or D&I programs exist, along with its benefits, and the awakening moment. That moment being what's next, or as I like to say, so what? There's a good deal of D&I initiatives in our industry. However, we are at the exact moment where the rubber must meet the road. We believe you joined today's conversation because you are interested in being or you are a change agent. It is our wish that today's webinar is as interactive as possible. So as previously mentioned, your questions can be posed in the question box on the right of your screens. We will do our best to address all questions during the Q&A session toward the end, provided your questions have not already been addressed. Let's get started by setting the stage for today's discussion by polling our attendees. This poll and future polls will stay on the screen for approximately 30 seconds, followed by the results of the poll. Okay. So everybody cast your answers. Let me say votes. Okay. All right. So here are your results. Have you or anyone you know been impacted by systemic racism? So 73% answered yes, 9% answered no, and 18% answered unsure. Well, I mean, that's why it's important to have this conversation. All right, thanks. So I'll share a little bit. As a descendant of the founder of Bethune-Cookman College and civil rights activist, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, my parents and my grandparents ensured that my siblings and I learned the truth about our history, which wasn't reflected in the history books provided by our schools. So ladies first, Denise, in your opinion, what is one of the most courageous or meaningful stories in Black history?
I mean, that is a gigantic list, right? In terms of what we're looking at. I am Jamaican, and so there was a big uprising in Jamaica where the slaves took over and took back their freedom. It's that story, it's stories like that in Haiti. But really, honestly, Renee, what's happening right now to me is a big moment and something I'm really proud of in Black history. There are a lot of things going on, a lot of issues to work on and solve for. But I think right now we are at a point in history where I'm going to be most proud of it because of the work that you and I and everybody on this call, et cetera, are looking to do to make some real change where there's been a little bit of soft movements in the past. So it's right now, actually.
Yes, interesting point. Ricky, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts, Renee, really tie around the Underground Railroad. And when I sit back and I reflect on, the stories that were told in school, you sit back and you think, really, how in depth did those stories actually go? You heard about Harriet Tubman and her being a slave, and she became a conductor and went back and actually rescued other slaves and took them through the Underground Railroad passages to freedom. But it really didn't get into the depth and reference to how African Americans were really treated, during that process. But it was really more focused about how they secured freedom by moving across different parts of the United States to go to areas where slaves were deemed as free. And that actually happened between 1810, I think, and 1860. But when I sit back and I actually reflect on my grandparents were actually sharecroppers in the state of North Carolina, where there was slavery. And my grandmother was born in 1911, and she passed away almost 5 years ago to this date. So she lived till she was 104.
Wow.
And I sit back and I reflect on what I was taught in high school compared to some of the stories that she shared in reference to her upbringing. And while she was blessed to go through and be able to get a high school education, but to be a sharecropper and to basically crop tobacco and crop cotton and have her first two children born on, I'm going to call it a plantation, and just move forward in reference to where we are today when we talk about acceptance and equality and human dignity. I still think there's work to be done. So I just think that what we learned in school really just was the tip of the iceberg. It really didn't go into depth in reference to the true plight of the African Americans and what's going on today, as Denise has stated. I think we're at a moment right now where we're going to have momentous change, and this momentum isn't going to stop for quite some time.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree with that. And that leads me into, our the next phase of our discussion, which is personal challenges. Both you and Denise touched upon things that are personal to you. So can you describe any personal challenges with feeling welcomed, appreciated, and adequately rewarded in your personal lives and or careers, and how you work through those challenges? So we'll start with you, Ricky.
Yeah, that's a multifaceted question there. So I'm gonna take a step back and talk about my personal challenge. I'm live in New Jersey, but I'm originally not from New Jersey. So we moved here in 2004, and where we live on a cul-de-sac, and we were one of the last families that actually moved into the community. So there's 8 houses on our block. But one of our long-standing neighbors who was there from the beginning actually walked down and had a conversation with my wife one of the days that I had went to work. And it really tied into, I'm gonna use the term microaggression or really redlining. So the dialogue went, as follows: is, as a black man, is your husband educated?
Mm.
So that was what was asked of my wife. So now this is 2004. This isn't back in the 1800s.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got a neighbor asking, is your husband educated? How can a black person live in this area? Are you going to bring down the value of our property by moving into this, into this area? So I think there was more fear, and my wife had to take the step back and really educated them about the questions that they were asking and how demeaning they were, and really were they truly seeking for understanding. And to me, the way that you have to change some of the thought process is to engage in dialogue that may be uncomfortable, but don't come with the perception that because somebody may look different than you, that they're going to bring down the value of your property, or they're not welcome, in the place that you're at. So
Yeah.
that was my first indoctrination to New Jersey with a young family at that point in time. And then I would say from a career challenge perspective, and I've been in the industry, as you stated, for over 35 years, but part of the industry that we are accustomed to, you go through mergers and acquisitions. And one of the companies that I was actually involved with a merger earlier in my career, they came flat out stating that we acquired you. We don't see you in the same vein as the employees that grew up with us, that went through our training and that we hired. And it wasn't as if they were looking for the best talent through the acquisition and the merger. It was that it was still the good old boy network, and you just didn't fit in. So, that was painful. I actually left the organization because our core beliefs did not line up with one another, but I was asked to come back 5 years later, but the leadership team had totally been disbanded, and a new leadership team came on board. But it's one of those career defining moments where you're like, I'm being judged on the color of my skin, not on the content of my character, what I can bring to the organization, as well.
Yeah.
And then I would just fast forward to the reward piece that you asked in that question as well. And I would say the most rewarding is the current role that I have right now. And I would say this, this opportunity came up, and my sponsor, who was a white male, actually put my name into consideration for the role that I have right now. So I just think that it's very important that when you think about your career journey and the value of mentoring and sponsoring, that there are times where somebody's going to potentially put their brand on the line for you. And my current boss, he was very transparent in reference to my sponsor actually had connected with him and actually approached him asking, have you thought about Ricky for this role? And he stated, he goes, I didn't really think about you at that point in time. I knew of you, but you really didn't cross my mind. But it worked out tremendously well from the conversation. So I just think that there can be rewards, and I just think that people who are your sponsors, even if they're white males or white females, somebody that does not look like an African American person, when they step out on the line and they vouch for you, good things can happen as well. They can be a tremendous ally for you.
Yeah, no, and you use the word sponsor. That's key. That's key. It's not just about mentorship. I think the sponsorship comes before the mentorship component comes.
Right.
And we're going to talk about that as we move along in the conversation. Sponsorship and mentorship. Denise.
Yeah, I want to say that the sponsorship is so important, specifically because, and you said by white male or white female, that's who we're going to have to get the sponsorship from at certain levels, because we don't exist at certain levels within the industry. So in order to move past certain levels and look for someone to mentor you or sponsor you, it's going to be an ally. It's going to be a white male, not white female most of the time. But I think, Ricky, I had a similar situation happen to me in college with your personal one, where I was dorming with two white girls when I first started University of Maryland, and I had a scholarship in computer engineering to the school as a freshman, which is really unheard of because you normally got accepted into the program your junior year. I was accepted directly into the program as a freshman. And I was on campus with my two roommates, and my friend came in and talked to me. We were both from Teaneck, New Jersey, and we were having some debate on something political that was happening at the time. And one of my roommates, my friend left, so we could get her card so we can go to the dining hall, so we can go talk to our friends. And one of my roommates, when she left, said to me, I don't want you to get offended, but I want to say something to you. And I was like, okay, it's a way to tee it up. So let's see what she says. And she said, I've never heard two Black people speak that intelligently before. And I did not get upset. And you would think that, how did you not get like irate immediately? I very carefully listened to her statement, and she said that she had never seen, she was telling me her experience. Either she had never looked for it or she had literally never seen it, but she was telling me her experience. I couldn't be mad at her for that. But what I did was share mine, in that I've never heard two Black people not speak this intelligently before. So that's a difference in our views, and I'm glad that I'm here to open you up to what the world really is, or at least what it can be. And so personally, that was an interesting conversation and moment for me. I come from a very diverse community, so I didn't really have that. I was senior vice president of my class, and I was a peer leader, and I taught SATs as a senior, and I was a captain of color guard, and all the in the band, and all these different things. So clearly I was seen as who I was based off everything I'd done in my community. But then entering a world where I was reintroducing myself to people who had been brought up with all their own biases their whole lives, it was interesting how to play that and work that when I was in college. But I think at work, I started out as an admin, as I spoke about before, and I did a really good job as an admin. 3.5 years later, they were ready to promote me to business analyst, begrudgingly, because they didn't want to lose me. And when they decided to do it, they said, you create the template for how we're going to look for the person. I want you to interview. I want you to create a test, because we basically want to replace you with you, because you did such a good job. We don't want to lose you. We know we have to promote you, but we don't want to lose you. And so I did, and I found we found an amazing girl, and she came in, and she was blonde hair, blue eyes from Connecticut, and amazing, really good. She and I are still really good friends to this day. She wanted to do more and grow, so I was helping her by giving her extra assignments. So I did it in 3.5. Let's see if you can do it in 2 or 1, right? Let me give you the support that I didn't really have, and help you grow as well. And so one day she came to me after I'd given her an extra assignment and said, hey, mind if I give this to you Friday? I said, listen, take your time. I've already done it. This is for you to like learn off of. She said, okay, great, because this senior vice president has invited me to go to a broker meeting and a broker lunch so I can see what that's like and how that works. And I said, great, have a great time. But when she walked away, all I wanted to do was scream, because no one ever asked me if I wanted to go to a broker lunch or go to a meeting to expand my view of what was going on in the company. And she was there for a few months, and this is 3.5 years later. I had done such a good job, they wanted to replace me with me, but that they weren't giving me the same opportunity to grow and to give me the opportunity to develop myself or to support to even know what was going on. I had no background in insurance when I first started. And so that to me was some of the microaggressions that I still carry with me. This is 9 years later. It's still in my mind. It's still something that I think about when working with people and operating with people. Fortunately, that was the minority of the situations that I had at AIG. And I really had a lot of help and sponsorship, to your point, Ricky. The first really big one was Mariah Propus. She actually saw me speaking at an event. She was an executive in Lexington's distribution at the time. She saw me speaking at an employee resource group event, and she thought that my personality and such lent itself to being more on the front end. And she was the first person to talk to me about an opportunity of working on the front end and actually create an opportunity for me to interview to be a business development manager, ultimately the role that I got. She sponsored me in that role with very little information about me, based off a few conversations and seeing me in action at a very public event. And then after that, a lot of my management has been that way. So even my movement into a client director role within the organization was really based off of sponsorship and coaching from my zonal president, who really, so John Gambale sat down with me and really took a look at what I was really good at and what really made sense for me and where business development made sense. He thought, I'd like to invest more in the relationship management piece of it, because she's really good at that piece. So I'd like to promote her and give her more of that, not just give it to me and walk away, right? Because everything is new, the people, the experiences, the products are the same. I've been learning that for years, but he was like, I want to make sure that your voice is heard. Let me coach you on this conversation. How are you going to do this, et cetera. Not only giving me the opportunity, but then coaching me to make sure that I was ready for the opportunity and take the best advantage of it. So those things help. And I'll talk to you more about the ERG and its place in that further on down the line.
Yeah, no, this is interesting experiences. You know, as you both talk, I can say that I've had similar experiences in that my first sponsor out of college happened to be an African-American female, and she brought me into Wausau Insurance Companies, and subsequent sponsors have been white professionals. And so, you know, it's awesome when you can connect with people and people really can look past the color of your skin and totally support you in that way. So while we're talking about workplace relationships, you know, we'd like to think that we have great workplace relationships. I'm going to take one step further and ask, you know, generally, would you invite your coworkers to your home for a meal? We talked about educating ourselves on one another's cultural differences. So could the lack of educating ourselves on those differences be a roadblock? Let's talk about some ways employees from varied demographic groups can be made to feel comfortable engaging with one another in the workplace. So one of you, feel free to take that.
I'll start, and I would say yes, I would feel comfortable taking someone to my home for dinner, but I'm going to put a caveat on that. It doesn't happen overnight. So you've got to develop a relationship, and you're right, there could be some roadblocks due to lack of education or not understanding some of the cultural norms. But I think if you open yourself up to really real conversations, you know, Denise, you were talking about when you went to college and the people that you interacted with and having those open conversations, it really opens people's eyes up in reference to who you are, and where they may have their own misperceptions. You can seek for understanding, but also it gives you the opportunity to know who they are and what they believe in, you know, as well. So I would say you have to become comfortable with becoming uncomfortable, and I think that's a delicate place for some people in reference to being able to show maybe they're vulnerable and that they don't know everything, but they're willing to open themselves up to other cultures, other ideas, other people, other ethnic groups. You can put the full gamut on that. And I would say most recently we have we call them listening sessions here at our organization, which is being funneled either regionally or through some of our diversity networks, which are our ERG type organizations. And I was just in one about a week and a half ago, and there was a gentleman on the conversation, and there was 96 of us on this call, and he was a white male, and he asked the question, is it okay to wish a Black person happy Juneteenth?
Mm.
And he actually stated he Googled, and he was trying to find, was there a response on there or not? And he couldn't find something that gave a unanimous response. So he said, I'm going to take this opportunity to share with you, you know, how I feel and what I'm wrestling with. And it took a lot of courage, you know, for him to be able to say, you know what, I'm trying to learn. I want to be a great ally, but I don't know where the boundaries are. And he actually turned it over, and he stated, if somebody went to me and wished me a happy Holocaust Day, he goes, I'd be offended.
Mm.
I would be offended. So I'm just trying to find out, is it okay from the Black community to be wished a happy Juneteenth Day? And it was unanimous. Yes, the answer was yes. But we also stated that we have to recognize what the boundaries are for you as well. And there are, you know, stopping places. But to me, unless you have those courageous conversations, you can't get to the breakthrough of understanding.
Yeah. No,
I think the trust factor is very big on there. So building that trust is going to be important. And in order to build that trust, you have to have that open mind and not come with the judgment. So I am Jamaican. I was born in New York City, but I'm a first generation American. And honestly, my Jamaican culture is very, very, very deep. That's Bob behind me right there. Bob Marley's right there. I am very, very into my culture. And so, but I don't shy away from it. But I learned to not shy away from it as I built my confidence as well, right? So as the organization allowed me to be myself and accept me, the more I felt open about allowing myself to express who I really am. So we're talking about what happened this weekend and what we're doing. I'm like, yeah, I made some curry goats and oxtail and rice and peas. And I get into that. I could go into that and talk about what that's like for me. I'm going to Carnival. I'm doing this. I'm doing whatever to understand my culture. And as my colleagues respectfully look to engage more about that, tell me more about that, learn more about that, I begin to build that trust more. I'm lucky to work with a team. A couple of years ago, when we were at the most fullest of our team, different organizations, my team took me out for my birthday and they took me to Miss Lily's, which is one of my favorite Jamaican restaurants in the city, right? So a lot of them had never eaten any Jamaican food ever, but they were all there and they all came and they all sat and they all experienced stuff and talked about what they liked the best, and not disrespectfully, but very much in a spirit of being interested in where I'm coming from and really giving me a time that was about me for myself on my birthday. And that was their idea to do that. And so it's that kind of trust that I built with my colleagues that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, even though I am one of one in all different ways that you would probably immediately identify me within my team. I'm the only Black person and I'm the only woman on my team. But that being said, I don't feel as alone as other people who have that same statement because my team is so supportive, because the organization breeds a culture that's supportive and inclusive. So that is, those are all ways to kind of get through that. But yeah, I have invited my coworkers to my house for a meal, and they've invited me to their house for a meal as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing growth. I'm hearing new experiences. I'm hearing stepping outside of our comfort zones. I mean, that's what this is about. The trust factor, as you guys mentioned, it's important. You know, no one wants to feel judged because they may do things differently or they may view things differently. I personally love to be exposed to new experiences, good, bad, and indifferent. I think that's what this is about. It's educating ourselves, one another on the cultural differences of our peers, whether it's professionally or on a personal level, and that's how we continue to move forward. So attendees, another polling question will appear on your screens, so please respond within 30 seconds. So it says, how familiar are you with the Black Lives Matter movement and its mission? Okay. Results, okay. 56% would be very familiar, 43% somewhat familiar, and 2% not at all. All right, well, that's a good segue into our next piece of the discussion. So let's talk about Black Lives Matter. Much has been made of the way that the Black Lives Matter movement has been portrayed in the media. The Black Lives Matter statement alone seems to draw controversy. So Denise and Ricky, let's talk about what's truly meant when we say Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I'll jump into that first. So a lot of people say in response to that, the common response to that is all lives matter. You know, that's the response to that. And that can be taken I'm very offended by that, right? Because I have marched in Black Lives Matter. When people yell back to me, all lives matter, it's disrespectful to me. And why is it disrespectful? Obviously, all lives matter, right? That's not a disrespectful statement on its own. Same thing with Black Lives Matter. It's not a disrespectful statement on its own. Black Lives Matter is, when we talk about Black empowerment, it's not in a sense of superiority or supremacy. It's in a sense of equality. That's all it is. It's just about gaining equality. And so when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not saying it matters more than others. We're saying it also matters, right? Because what we're seeing is that in the context of society, Black lives don't matter as much. And we're seeing it by the way we're portrayed in the media, by the way things are weaponized against us, by the way that we're shown on movies, down to the way that there is systemic racism that impacts all of us in different ways. And it's become just a normal thing. This country was built on a lot of that. And so it's become ingrained in our DNA. None of us on this call or around really believe in that, but we all live and function in that society the way it is right now. And when we say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean that other lives don't matter, right? The same way when you go to a breast cancer awareness event, nobody walks in and says, what about prostate cancer? Or what about ovarian cancer? That's not a thing, right? If somebody comes in and says, oh, they're crying at work and they say, what's wrong? And they're like, oh, I lost my parent this weekend. You don't say, well, all parents die. That's not a thing that you say, right? At this moment, we're focused on this one thing, and it's the thing that needs help. If there's a house burning down on a block, you don't send the firemen to every other house that's not burning to pull the people out. You focus on the house that is on fire. And Black Lives Matter encompasses a lot of different things. It's not just about police reform. It's just not just about corporations. It's everything. It's the way that the fabric of our DNA within the United States and how we are. This is the greatest country in the world, right, to me. But just like how, we look to improve things, it can get better. It can get better. And so we have to not saying that Black Lives Matter and that things need to change in this country is actually being a patriot, because we want to see this country the best that it can be in the way that it can be. So it's not meant to divide. When I went to march in Teaneck, it was very comforting because I was in the minority in terms of who was out there protesting. It was mostly white people. And there were all these signs all over that said, the Jewish community stands with Black Lives Matter, and they were out here handing out water and handing out snacks because, honestly, it's a movement for all of us. The same way that I march in the Pride Parade, or I will rock a rainbow pin, even though I'm not a part of the alphabet community, that is another part of what Black Lives Matter. That's what we're looking for, the allyship. And by the way, it's perfectly not only okay, but what we want for our allies to really scream it from the top of their lungs as well. Because honestly, the bullies have run the show for too long. The majority of us are good people. And when we stand up to the bullies, we can make them back down. We can get the change that we really want to see in this country.
Absolutely. Ricky?
Yeah, Denise said a lot there, and I'm just going to hit a couple of points. One is that she's spot on where, people say all lives matter, and it's offensive, and she's given all the reasons why. And I would say this. I agree that all lives do matter, but you can't say all lives matter until you can say Black Lives Matter, as well. So we have to get to that point, get away from all the political jargon around it, and just come to the realization from that standpoint. And then I would also ask that as we think about Black Lives Matter, there's a couple of components to this. There's the actual organization, Black Lives Matter, and then there's actually the movement as well. So when I looked at the poll that was just done, and there was some that were in that somewhat, I think it was in the 40-something%, like 43%.
Yes.
I would encourage us all to make sure that we have a thorough understanding when somebody throws out the moniker Black Lives Matter. You should ask the question, are you talking about the organization or are you talking about the movement? Because the organization was really created to intervene in reference to Black communities, to help them thrive, to be more socially, economically empowered, and also be able to thrive like anybody else. The movement is actually focused on nonviolent disobedience and protest against police brutality against African American people, and that's international. It's just not here domestically in the United States. So I would just ask that as we continue to educate ourselves, that we educate ourselves in reference to the distinction between the movement and the distinction between the Black Lives Matter organization as well.
Yeah, good point, Ricky. Good point, and awesome explanation, Denise. I hope that everyone on the call has a much better understanding of what is meant by Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement. So when I think of the Black Lives Matter movement, I can't help but quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So considering the impact that the killing of George Floyd has had on our country and the world at large, various individuals and organizations within and outside of our industry have issued anti-racism statements. Let's discuss not only talking the talk, but also walking the walk. We know firsthand the laws, policies, and practices have been set up to exclude African Americans from the opportunities, freedom, and prosperity afforded by other members of the population. Clearly, there's a major barrier in achieving racial equity, and that should be everyone's concern. So we talked about learning more about each other's cultures. What are some of those other barriers? How can we collectively break those barriers down? So Ricky, I'll start with you.
So I would say there's a need to go back and reconstruct some of the policies that exist that cripple the Black community. And also the Black community still has to take responsibility for some of these policies themselves. So we need to have a seat at the table as these policies are reconstructed to have our voice heard as well. And I'll give you, an example that's going on right now. We're all in this COVID-19, environment. But if you really peel back the onion and you see the people that are getting impacted, it's the Black community, the people of color are really getting devastated. And part of it is because of lack of health care. And if you think about some of the impoverished neighborhoods, you may not even find a hospital, in a vicinity, where some of this is going on. So I think there isn't adequate health care. And I would even say, take a look at the PPE loans that were given out. Some of the small businesses and Black-owned businesses did not get a chance to even get into the fray in reference to requesting this because maybe there was a lack of education or a lack of resources through this. So when we talk about policy changes, I just think that some of those are the areas that could be focused in on as we continue to reconstruct what America should look like as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when you talked about COVID a little bit, the ripple effect that led to the Black community being disproportionately affected by COVID is serious, right? So it goes way, way back to beyond just the fact that we're in these dense populations in these metropolitan areas. But you think about why we're there and why there's a lack of health care and why there's food deserts in these areas and what created that environment. You go back to redlining and what that looked like, right? So a big part of this, and one of the biggest pieces of this, probably most challenging but the most rewarding, is the education piece of this, right? So right now, if you just wake up and you walk into the world and you just look at a space, you might say, oh, disproportionately, brown and Black people like to live in these low income areas. That's not the case. The case is, when you look back in time, there was redlining that took place that didn't allow for Black businesses to get loans, or if they did get loans, the interest rates were incredibly high, so they couldn't compete with their white counterpart businesses that they were competitors with because they could offer the products at a much cheaper rate, and they couldn't stay in business because of that. At the same time, they would cut highway planning. If you look at the Highways Act, I forgot the year, in the 1950s, where they cut highways through Black communities, cutting them off from direct access to areas they really need to go to in order to build the communities up. All these things and much more playing into the effect of where we are today. That part of the education of our history is left out of a lot of our textbooks. For the civil rights movement, you hear a lot about Rosa Parks and Dr. King. They were very instrumental parts of the movement, but they were just pieces of the movement. And in all parts of life, history is written by the conquerors. And so many of you have not heard of Rosewood or Tulsa and Black Wall Street and Juneteenth. All these things are new things to you. They are critical parts of American history, and yet it's not taught. From the very beginning of time, when I was 5 years old and I begin to read, I start learning European history. If I want to learn about African history, which, by the way, did not start with slavery, a whole lot of things happened before that. We were kings and queens and running all kinds of things before that. I have to take an elective in college, right? Which means that European history, white history, is mandatory and my history is optional. And that needs to change. We need to tell the story of all people. And a big part of that needs to happen when we're considering how we're going to look at changes. So education reform, social reform, making sure that there are hospitals and community services available, mental health clinics. One of the reasons why you may hear the term defund the police, it's not that we don't want police. It's that oftentimes in these minority communities, it's over-policed. And so a lot of the funding goes to police departments, but not to social programs that help with healthcare or mental abilities or social programs like band and camps and youth programs. These things are not, they're disproportionately ignored to rather look for the punishment of people who never got the opportunity or access to these programs and therefore led in situations where you just repeat a very, very bad cycle. And so it's a lot of reform from the systems that is the way this country was built that we have to look into. It is very overwhelming, but it can be done.
Yeah.
And, Denise talked about education. And to me, that would be another challenge for everyone that's on this webinar is to indoctrinate yourself. There's documentaries out there. There are podcasts out there. There's books. And one of the ones that I just looked at from a documentary not too long ago, and I had seen it before, 13th. And it's on Netflix, and it's really interesting. And I was talking to who I report to, my boss, and we were talking about this after the George Floyd murder. And it was interesting because that documentary was actually done in 2016, but everything that's in there is relevant today. And
Wow.
it goes from, slavery all the way through mass incarceration to how policies and laws were set up. You talked about the redlining, that, that's in there as well. So it's really interesting, but it just shows that we really haven't moved far as a country. When you look at some of the things that have been going on for many, many years, it's very systemic.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, so you talk about communities, both Ricky and Denise. I mean, it's important for us in the communities that we live in. We have to encourage one another to complete the census, right? The census data is what's going to drive those programs, and we know that being adequately funded in our communities and having access to all of the programs, it ultimately translates to lower crime in our communities. So we also, I think I heard you guys talk about us taking accountability for some of these items as well. All right, so attendees, we are going to move on to another polling question. It's going to appear on your screens now. Does your organization currently have a D&I program? Okay, the results, 48% of you said yes, 28% said no, and 24% says I'm unsure. All right, that's interesting. So one question that was raised by one of the attendees, I'm gonna just dig into that a little bit because that also tracks with D&I and engagement. So we have a question, any advice for me as a white female to check in with my Black colleagues to let them know I care about them and I'm concerned about how they are handling this moment without sounding condescending or inappropriate? And I think Ricky and Denise, you touched upon it, but if you can just kind of answer that question and provide any assistance or advice that you have at this moment.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on this very quickly because I've been talking about this a lot too, internally and externally. There's two main things here, right? One is making sure that where you stand and that your stance and where you are in your understanding of what's going on and your stance, I stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. I stand against any kind of discrimination against any kind of person, and making that very well known, being vocal about that. Now we can see you, right? Now we acknowledge that you're an ally. But the second part is just to leave the door open so you can go to your Black colleague and say, I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, and you may or may not have opinions about it or thoughts about it, but I just want to let you know that if you ever want to talk, I'm here. I'm open to listening to you and hearing about your experiencing and seeing if there's anything that I can do, whether it be just lending an ear or actually something tangible that I could do. But I'm here for you if you need that. And I think that that's very important because not every Black person is going to want to talk about their experiences. It is very painful. It is almost embarrassing that we have to go through this still.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for us to admit this because we don't want to be seen as different because of that and seen as a victim or anything else. But at the same time, we do want you to acknowledge that this is something that's real, that is affecting us. It's affecting us being able to do our jobs effectively, to not to have this anxiety, this extra burden of walking around with all these extra things. If I told you what goes through my head before meetings, you would say, how do you even get to the content of the meeting you have to do, right? But we've normalized a lot of things that shouldn't be normal. And so it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable for you as a white female or a white male or anything else, but do it anyway and just put yourself out there because 9 times out of 10, we're walking around having normalized feeling uncomfortable just to be able to exist in this world, in this industry, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, when you ask that question about how can I support you, through that, I would even say, ask the question as to how that person is feeling, because I think that's really going to open it up in reference to truly what's going on. And you may find out that really what's going on, it's not pertaining to anything at work. It's probably something that's going on in their social life. I can give you examples of my kids being pulled over by the police. And then you kind of freak out because you're like, is this going to be the last time that I'm going to see my son? because he's driving around with a hoodie or because his windows are tinted out and the police officer are going to look at it in the wrong way. And I'm not saying that police officers are bad, but sometimes somebody may make a rash or a quirky move, and that makes that person a little uncomfortable as well. So there's a big education piece. So you may come to work and it may look like Ricky's got himself all together, but mentally, maybe I've had a bad experience that's not letting me bring my whole self to work. That, yeah, if somebody asks me how am I feeling, I'll probably tell you in reference to what's going on, going on as well. So just be prepared, be supportive, but also when you talk about being an ally, there may be things that you've seen that made you uncomfortable, and if it's made you uncomfortable, how do you change that when you're into that next scenario like that as well?
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
act differently?
Agreed.
I want to be clear that it's true. You do not know what's happening in our day-to-day lives. I told a story recently. I was on my way from Marsh back to AIG on the subway, and someone who clearly had mental health issues got on the train with me, and at some point decided that he was going to take his ranting about something inappropriate and turn it on to me. And for 15 minutes through 3 or 4 stops, I sat and listened to him at the top of his lungs call me every single racial word you've ever heard of, the N-word, a gorilla, an ugly black, nappy-headed, all these different things for 10 to 15 minutes at the top of his lungs, screaming at me on a subway. And I was at work. I was going from Marsh to AIG and had to continue on my day, right, after having that happen to me. And so the things that we go through are inconceivable to you. That's just what I went through that day. But, on a general basis, in general, the things that we go through just living our lives, just functioning, just living while black, the things that happen to us, you would never even begin, because that's how much we're carrying with us when we walk into work, but we're so used to having to shove that down. And I think that what you're seeing right now is we can no longer do that. We cannot escape that and separate that from who we are anymore. We will not do it anymore. So that's a big piece of what happened. So yeah, feel free to ask the question. Understanding that some people may not want to talk about that, and that's going to be okay. But you give yourself the opportunity to say that you're an ally and you're willing to listen.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely got to be a trust factor. We keep saying that there's got to be a trust factor. I personally, I'm a very private person, and so it's kind of tough for folks to crack my shell. But I too have an experience. I mean, my experience has been being stopped multiple times by police officers because of the type of car that I drive, and so the reason why I've been stopped. And it's something made up. It's you weren't wearing a seatbelt. No, officer, I actually have one on. It's you were on your cell phone. I even offered to show the officer my call log. And when I offered that, he just said, okay, you have a nice day, and he let me go. It's things like when I had my daughter in the car with me, she was terrified when we got pulled over for doing absolutely nothing. The officers could not tell me why they pulled me over. They wanted to search my car. I refused. I know my rights. And so they left me alone. But how many cases out there where it goes the complete opposite way,
Right. Right.
And I'm also fortunate too. My honey is in law enforcement, so I'm able to carry things like cards and documentation that helps me in that respect. And I give those cards to the kids, even when the kids are taking buses and trains, because you never know. You never know if your kid is going to leave home and if they're going to come back to you safely. So it is a concern, and something that has us on pins and needles constantly.
Yeah.
So getting back over to D&I programs, there's a percentage of the attendees that are not sure if their companies have D&I programs, and there's a percentage of attendees that say outright we don't have them. Maybe this is something that we can help them with, although we don't claim to be D&I experts. Maybe this conversation can help get the conversation started within their organizations. So being that both your organizations, AIG and Travelers, have D&I initiatives, if you could, just based on your experience with those initiatives, how would you both define diversity and inclusion? Because they're two different things.
So I'll start. Diversity is a representation of perspective, cultures, and various people groups. That's the way that I look at it. And I would say inclusion is the accepting of something, a person, people who are in the minority that want to get into the majority, but
Mhm.
they want to become part of the collective whole. And it's not about that you're assimilating them to become part of that they're bringing their own uniqueness to that as well. So it's not that you would have changed somebody. All of us are unique, and that's the beauty of inclusion as well, bringing that unique thought process and characteristics to the table, to the collective whole.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just quickly say diversity is a seat at the table. Inclusion is your voice at the table. And so the two things are very, very, one is just literally the physical representation, but inclusion is when your voice actually matters and you're able to affect change and affect the organization and be a part of the organization. To Ricky's point, a part of the collective voice and culture of the organization. So it's not just enough to have us there. You need to make sure that you're utilizing us and engaging with us and making sure that our voices are heard there as well.
Yeah, I agree. I called into a business insurance webinar, and it was a similar topic on diversity and inclusion. And one of the panelists said, this is how he described it, and I'll never forget it. He said, diversity is being invited to the dance. He said, inclusion is being asked to dance. And that was just so powerful for me. So I think, if we're going to have D&I initiatives in our industry, and we need to really, all of us, understand what that means. So also, based on your organization's D&I initiatives, what are some of the key benefits that your organizations have reaped?
There's been a few for us. One is the person of color representation has increased at the manager level and above, and that's really been based on our focus of reviewing our practice, enhancing our strategies around recruiting, hiring, as well as interviewing, as well. And then also we're closing the education gap through, we call it Traveler's Edge, and EDGE stands for Empowering Dreams, Graduation, and Employment, and where we work with various schools in Hartford, as well as St. Paul and Alpharetta, Georgia, where we start with the young individuals getting ready to go from high school into college, as well as various universities as well. We help with some of their financial support. We provide them internships as well, and we hope that those internships will lead to employment with Travelers or within the financial services industry as well. So we're seeing great benefits from there, but also what we're seeing from these initiatives that it fosters this whole environment of inclusion with our employees, so everybody feels that they can reach their full potential as being a part of, if it's our diversity networks, which again is our ERGs. We provide learning opportunities, as well, to advance diverse leaders, and it could be different educational opportunities that we provide as well. And then we also explore diverse markets where we want to tap in for tomorrow, as well. So we have been reaping benefits from it. We still have work to do, but we're still on that journey.
Awesome. Denise?
Yeah, I would say mostly the same. We have a few programs within internally that are pipelining for diverse candidates, whether it be the Women's Executive Leadership Initiative, the Executive Men's Development Initiative, which are both targeted at senior level to prepare minority cultures to get ready for that executive level, and include mentoring and program, et cetera. And then the Accelerated Leadership Development Program, which is something that comes down further. It's one of the conversations we had as an ERG was, these programs are great, but if you really want to tap into diverse people, you're going to have to come down lower, because we don't exist at the levels in which you're currently pipelining. So they created that through organizations like working with DSY for internship programs, having an early career team that's specifically focused on diversity and inclusion, working with diverse suppliers and making sure we're managing that as well. I think that, as an organization, even as an industry, we've done pretty good with getting women to accelerate and be at different parts of the company. And so we can take from the lessons learned from that and apply it to other underrepresented groups, whether it be LGBTQ, Asian American, Black, whatever it may be, and kind of apply the same reasoning and logic and execution for there as well. Externally, we've done things like we had the Global Inclusion and Cultural Agility work stream, and we had ERG leaders from around the world come together in 5 different work streams to work We did one for business integration. I worked on one for that. And through it, even though I'm on commercial insurance, we ended up developing a product and experience for consumer for our personal line around travel guards. So we created a product, name your family. So we're not looking at what the government necessarily says is your husband, your wife, your spouse, whatever you may be. And not only the tangible product, but even the experiences. So when you call in to travel guard to talk about a claim or talk about whatever's going on or to sign up for it, what does that experience look like? If you're a man, are they asking you what's your wife's name? That's not necessarily sensitive to the community. So we need to make sure that we're inclusive in our language, right? Which changes the culture as well. And so we have a lot of different things going on. The best thing about it, we have over 110 ERGs globally of about 12 or 13 different affinity groups. So Black professionals, young professionals, women and allies, LGBTQ, working families, et cetera. And so we have about a third of the AIG population in one or two employee resource groups. And that, to your point, Ricky, will create a culture of inclusion. And it's set us up for the work we're doing right now, right? AIG didn't hesitate on putting on a statement on standing where they need to stand because they've been doing the work as being a part of Human Rights Campaign and being a part of Diversity Inc.'s top 50 companies, et cetera. We've been doing that work. So it's set us up to do more and get to where we are now to be able to take the ball and move it again. So it's also benefited us in terms of having interns and analysts come in and talk to people who look like me and say, oh, there are Black people at senior levels of the organization. I might fit here. I could fit here. And it's not just Black women saying that to me. It's Asian men. It's white men. A lot of people coming in from the Gen Z, et cetera, they want to be a part of inclusive organizations that have a diverse perspective, a way they're doing business and looking at things, because that's where the innovation is going to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Innovation.
2 minutes.
Can I add one other piece to
Sure.
something that Denise stated? And our organization here at Travelers, we're about 30,000 employees. Over 13,000 are tied into our diversity networks. And to me, I feel that we're all diversity practitioners. We may have a strength greater than somebody else, but we're all charged with being diversity practitioners. But I'm going to go back to the question that was asked, that polling question, and some folks did not know if they had a diversity and inclusion initiative in their organization. And I would say it starts at the top. So our CEO, chairman and CEO, he regularly enforces that, as well as our other senior leaders, that diversity and inclusion is a business imperative for us. So that sets the stage, and it empowers us as employees to get after it and really see how we can bring out the full breadth within our organization. So our leadership team, they're on board with it, and our employees, we've got over a third that are driving this as well. So I just wanted to make sure that if you don't know, the leaders actually have to set the stage as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely, it comes from the top down, and everybody needs to embrace diversity and inclusion. As you guys mentioned, diversity is what fosters an innovative workforce.
Right.
We talk about market expansion. That's benefit for folks that want to kind of follow the money. The benefits are market expansion. And I was reading an article, 2018 Harvard Business Review study found that companies with higher than average diversity and inclusion had a 19% higher innovation revenue stream coming through. So I think that, there's so many pros. There's no cons. I not one that I could think of to having a D&I program. So thank you so much, Ricky and Denise. We're going to put another polling question up. We're at the top of the hour, so we're going to move through this a little quickly. So the next polling question is, how successful in meeting its business objectives is your organization's D&I program? And if you don't have one, then that's an option as well. Okay. Very successful, 15%, somewhat successful, 27%, needs work, 25%, 31% says my company needs to launch a D&I program, and 2% says my company does not have a D&I program and doesn't need one. Okay, interesting. All right. All right. So, we talked about people of color, including minorities, having a seat at the table. We talked about people of color, including African Americans, being grossly underrepresented in our industries. Ricky and Denise, you talked about ways that we can recruit diverse talent as well as retain diverse talent. So thank you so much for that. We're going to close with our final question, which is, what are some additional ways organizations and individuals within our industry can support the racial equity movement? So essentially, where do we go from here?
I'll just throw out a few. We touched on it earlier about educating yourself. And again, that could be books, podcasts, documentaries, YouTube, Twitter, you name it. There's a plethora of information that you can start to arm yourself with that. Engage in the uncomfortable conversations. They're tough, but if you're going to really have breakthrough, I would say challenge yourself with that process as well. And then I would say be an ally. And if you've got privilege, figure out how you can leverage your privilege with others. We talked about mentors and sponsorship. I believe that that's very, very critical. And be an agent of change. Truly be an agent of change.
Denise?
Yeah, I think number one, be curious, be intellectually curious, but most importantly, be open. So one of the things we don't want you to do is be defensive. The situation that we're in is real, and so sometimes when you question the validity of what our experiences are, it takes away from us actually being able to open up and have the conversation with you. You have to believe the Black person you talk to when they tell you what their experience is. It may not make sense to you because you will never experience it that way, but you have to understand that their reality is their reality. And so believe them when they're talking to you and listen to them in that way. I just think just open up your minds and your hearts. But really most importantly is when you see someone doing something that's not okay, call it out. Don't say, I would never do that, that's not me, and keep walking. You have to call it out. So when your uncle, your friend, or anybody says something that's a little bit strange, but you're like, oh, they got a good heart. Nope, call it out. Tell them it's not okay to do that. It's not okay to speak that way or be that way. And make sure that you are supportive of your colleagues. I can tell you from just personal experience, I have had a lot of movement and growth within AIG because of the support of my colleagues, not just my managers, but the people I work with day to day. I have a colleague, James Riviezo, a colleague, Chris Liu, at my organization who listen to me no matter what. They don't judge me. They take in what I'm saying. We have honest and open, healthy conversations. The girl I spoke about earlier, her name is Megan. We speak all the time about these situations. State where you are, state where you stand, be supportive, be open, and truly seek to listen, to understand. We're in the beginning. We're in the beginning stages. It is a long climb that we have to get through, but we're only going to do it together. Honestly, and I said this in before another one, Black people did not create or invent racism. We did not ask to be oppressed. It is actually something that we were forced into, that was brought onto us. We're not actually going to be the ones to solve this problem. It's going to be our allies. It's going to be the white men and women who are sitting at the helm, who have access to the controls and the levers within the system. It is going to be them. And more likely than not, even as on this call right now, you may know people who have the ability to do that. So make sure you're using your voice and your influence in those relationships with your mentors, your mentees, your sponsors, whoever, to push that along, become anti-racist, and really more just of an active ally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Could not have said it better myself. So for the attendees, we have one final polling questions, and we'll wrap up. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, what is your level of commitment in supporting racial equity? So 0% said low, 1% said 2, 2% would be neutral. 4%, 16% gave it a rating of 4, and 81% rated it a 5, which is high. So we totally thank you for your commitment. Appreciate your time today. A special thanks to our panelists, Denise Campbell and Ricky Jones. Thank you, IBANI, under the leadership of Justin Foa. Thank you, Amy Kansay, IBANI's programming chair, and most importantly, a special thanks to our attendees. Because of you, we can continue to put forth programming that's most supportive of our industry's progression. So look out for a survey concerning today's webinar, inclusive of any additional information you'd like from us, and stay tuned for upcoming IBANI education programs. We are a resource to all of our member companies, and again, we assure you that this is not a one and done effort. Enjoy your day and stay safe.